word? What's the word?
Oh, and it's Sunday. We are running a little bit behind schedule, but you know what? It's Sunday and it's live, and so are we. I mean, I don't know about you, Steve, but this I'm lucky to have got this thing going today. To be honest with you, I was I was sick as a dog this past week, man.
What happened?
I don't a cold. You know what I mean? One of those pesky, irritating, in your face colds that not enough to like knock you down, just enough to be like, I'm just gonna poke at you for a bit all friggin' week. You know what I mean?
I had the same thing on Thursday. I had that standing by the toilet thinking, I want to. I need to throw up. I have to. That would make me feel a lot better, but you're not going to let me, are you? I can't do that fingers down the throat thing. Well, I can. I'm not going to do it here because I'll probably throw up on air, which might get more viewers. Something to consider.
You know what? I am totally one of those dudes that can like get rid of it almost on cue. You know what I mean? It's taken years. It's taken absolutely years of practice. But true story. It was a birthday celebration. We were taking the subway back home because we were responsible human beings, and we had about 4 stops left. And I started to get that stop the world. I want to get off. And I had asked who I was with. I was like, because my eyes were closed, because you're just concentrating on not doing anything. I'm like, how many stops? How many stops until we're out of here? And they're like, 4 stops. I said, perfect. I got this. No problem. Oh, wow. There you are. Perfect. And sure enough, we got to that stop. Doors opened on the subway. I walked out of the subway right over to the garbage can. Responsibilities. Bloop. Got rid of every little bit of it. Everybody's like, okay, I guess you need to go home now. And I was like, no, I'm empty. Let's go. Let's get back at this again.
That's good. I make the mistake of when I say I'm okay now, I'm not going to be sick, and then I feel like I'm going to be sick, and I feel like I have to tell people, and I use a long sentence. No, I'm not all right. I think I'm going to be sick again. And by that time I've been sick. And then I put my hand up like this, and then you get 5 different jets of sick coming out. That's a mistake I made when I was a child, quite a lot.
Oh, well, I mean, listen, we set up habits. So this week, I kind of feel bad a little bit. I'm gonna pull it back a little bit because I'm gonna let people know, like, I kind of putting you on the spot here a little bit, right? I don't know if people have noticed or not, but you have a little bit of a different speeching thing than I do. And that's because everybody knows you are the pugilist from across the pond, right? And so I said to you on such short notice as of like yesterday, I was like, hey, how about we talk some British boxing? Because there's not a lot going on in the world of boxing. I mean, we're talking news-wise. You know, Edgar Berlanga beat up a half-squeezed tube of toothpaste yesterday.
Nick Ball kicked his opponent yesterday.
Dude,
and
that was the funniest. Well, I mean, come on. He had him in a headlock. He's trying to get, choke him out there, and looking at him, what? I don't have nothing. So he just kicked him. Listen, boxing.
But for once, the ref did the right thing and said, now listen, he just brought him in and said, don't be naughty, boys, more or less. Yeah. I'm going to have to do something if you're naughty. And later on, Ball also, he threw him down twice, and he said the first time, do it again, and I'll take a point off. Did it again, point off. That's the referee you want.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I mean, listen, hilarious, yes. Following the rules, yeah, absolutely. But let these guys fight, because we see it so many times before that just doesn't, that's not a thing. So I said to you, because it's, kind of a slow week for boxing. We got some setup weeks. So let's talk about some subjects. And I wanted you to school me. Like, I know a bit about, some who my favorite British boxers are and stuff like that. But I was like, hey, Steve Swift, let's talk British boxing. You're like, you son of a bitch.
I just thought now I need to do mother loving research. I need to research this because actually, one of these names is from the 70s, from the 60s, actually. So this is 50, what is that, 70 years ago? My maths is not good. That's 60 years ago. 60 years ago. So, I just had to do a bit of research, even on the names that I concentrated. Let me say Follocks, that I concentrated on names. One name you'll know, several names you'll know, but some of them you might not know. And actually, one of them I think has been overlooked, and he's a much better boxer than people have remembered.
Well, because there's some names when you sent me the list, I was like, okay, got it. Oh, I need to know about this. So let's get into this a little bit here, shall we? Let's just fix this up right here. Let's do one of these things right here. There we go. Now, this is kind of a little bit of bias because, we're talking about Lennox Lewis, of course, who you see there, right? Let's go with Lennox Lewis first, because if we're going to start, we got to start heavyweights. You know what I mean? And this is kind of a weird one because he's not a full Brit.
No, this is the problem we've got, you see. Several things happened with Lennox Lewis.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing that happened is he Canadian or is he British? And it's not maybe the US press, maybe the Canadian press. It's also the British press did the same thing. Not really British. And consequently, we never got behind him as much as we should. In the way that, for instance, we might have got behind Frank Bruno, Frank Bruno in pantomime, etc.
No, very quickly, when you did that, all it brought me to think was, remember Frank Bruno on Spitting Image? Remember the show Spitting Image, and they would always have Frank Bruno, stop doing that.
He hits me on the ears and makes them really big. I like that. Now, it's possible that during my acting period years where I was involved in commercial panto, I could and very nearly did work with Frank Bruno in panto.
All right.
I didn't do the panto that he was in, but I nearly worked with him. I also nearly worked with Britt Ekland.
Okay.
In a panto, which would have been very interesting. Anyway, back to Lex Lewis, to Lennox Lewis, or Lex Lewis, his brother, Lennox Claudius Lewis, who is a pugilist specialist, he mentioned to us, and is an overlooked brilliance. Now, one of the reasons being, as you say, that he's overlooked is because of the British-Canadian thing. The other thing that I remember in this country was he's not really a warrior. So, for instance, I'm not going to mention Chris Eubank in this list, spoiler alert, but we only really liked him when he became a warrior. And they never thought that Lewis was a warrior. Why? Oh, he plays chess. Yeah, he sees the matches in that respect, and he wins in that respect. So there was quite a lot of, well, he's not really a warrior. There was also quite a lot of, he's a mummy's boy, because his mummy Violet, he really likes her, and he's not got a relationship, has he? And even when he did have, the British press, if I remember rightly, were a bit, oh, really? So there was always that hanging around, which is just not appropriate in any way, shape or form. This man, remember, beat Evander Holyfield twice. I mean, let's not talk about, one was a draw, but it wasn't, was it?
No, it wasn't.
Definitely not. There are books written about this, Follocks, books written about it. Definitely not. And remember, this is a man who beat, a beaten Mike Tyson anyway, but beat that man handily. A brilliant fighter.
Also, side note, a damn good pool player.
Really?
So because he is Canadian as well, right? He holds that, like you were just saying, spent a lot of time in Toronto. I also used to run the door of a club in downtown Toronto during this time. And so there was a club across the street from us, a little downstairs, like more upscale, high scale, quiet, you know what I mean? Mind your business, like just chill out adult. It was more adult at the time, whereas like where I was, it was 3 floors plus a rooftop balcony, live to air. It was straight out of college. I just learned how to drink. Please take me home tonight kind of bullshit, right? But across the street, they were open on different nights than this club as well. And one night I'm over there because one of my best friends was the guy who ran the door there. And we're just chilling, hanging out. And he's like, all of a sudden, this guy's like, hey, you want to play some pool? Because we had the table or whatever. And I turn and I'm like, fucking Lennox Lewis. Absolutely. Pleasure to meet you. I go to shake this dude's hand. Now, don't get it twisted, Steve. I am 6'4" at the time, probably about 275 pounds, right? I go to shake this guy's hand, and I've never had my hand enveloped in such a large-handed human being in my life as the time that I met Lennox Lewis. I was like, holy Jesus, Murphy of God. Like, unbelievable. Gentleman like you would not believe. Very nice guy, very hospitable, but you could always see when he got in the ring. So that whole thing about that you say he wasn't a warrior, that was said by people that have never been hit by Lennox Lewis. Okay? Plain and simple.
Powerful and intelligent. And I have a little story about this as well. I never met Lennox, but I remember doing, when I was an actor, doing a show in a theatre that was outside of Reading. It was, you had to walk to, that was the biggest town. And it was the summer, and I walked down past and we'd been talking about the fight, and everyone was saying, Mike Tyson will destroy him. And I said, no, Lennox Lewis will work behind the jab. And they all said, oh, yeah, and he'll stop him. So which round will it be? And I said, the 7th. And I walked into the nearest town, and there was a betting shop. And outside that was Lennox Lewis to stop Mike Tyson in the 7th, 150-1. And I thought, I will go around the town, and then I will put a bet on. And then I spent too much time in the town, but I haven't got time to do that. I would have been quids in. And I tell people that over and over and over again. He was a fantastic fighter that people, there's an awful lot of column inches written about other fighters like Tyson and even like the Klitschko's. And Lewis is forgotten in that respect.
I agree 100%. Now, let's talk about this guy right here. I know you love you some Prince, right? Naseem Hamed will go down. Probably one of the flashiest flash in the pans, and I only mean this with the utmost respect, because the flashiest, when he came out, you were like, what is this? Where did this cat come from? This guy took a lot of things from, because there was other boxers, don't get it twisted. There was other boxers that did the things that he did individually. He did things from all of them himself, if that makes any sense, right? Like the Flash, when you saw this guy come out and do, spring handstands over the ropes, you see guys vault over, I'll mention his name again because we'll talk about him because he's on my list, Chris Eubank. But when you see, Naseem Hamed do this, it was different. And his cockiness in the ring, not just cockneyness, his cockiness in the ring was spectacular. You wanted to see him fight, right?
Yeah, you really did. Out of the Ingle Gym in Sheffield, a fantastic fighter. And that flash in the pan comment you make is absolutely right. And the reason being, it's not a bad thing.
Nope.
Boxing is about belief. Partially, it's about self-belief. And if you lose, and when you lose that self-belief, it's over. And that's what happened, I believe, to Naseem Hamed, in that he got beaten and lost that self-belief. And okay, he won another, but that was it. Done. And he's not returned at all. He's not returned really to commentary. He's not returned generally. I'm not, during the height of his powers, this is a man who released a chart-bound single, Tidster. It wasn't very good. He was rapping on it, if you can call it that. It was more like fast talking, in my view, but he released a single. And his cockiness is the kind of thing that you see now, but dialed down to 2 out of 10 from Ben Whittaker. So it was sleek and flashy. And as you say, actually not that much different to what others were doing, but he did it in a different way. And this is part of the business of boxing. And the stuff that I love, people will know this man. Of course they will. But really, as far as the and I'm speaking for a lot of British, and I do, being the prince of boxing the prince of Manchester and boxing world. I've been dubbed by Charles III. I dubbed the Prince of Boxing, Sir Steve of Swift Town, and we talk about Nassim Hamed. We still talk about Nassim Hamed, and whenever he's on programs, he's in the crowd. You have to get him on. You've got to get him on. And the man, one of the great things about Nassim Hamed is, and I'm not saying this in a bad way, since he's out of the ring, he's not continued to train. Let's put it that way. So the man doesn't look like that anymore. And that, for me, is a beautiful thing as well, because you say, that's it for me with boxing. It's done. I'm not going to come back. No way you can get back in that ring. You'd need about a year.
No, that is a dude who said, now I don't got to cut weight. Now I can enjoy some food. And he has enjoyed all of the food and he's deserved it. The hell does he need? What the hell does he need to prove anything to anybody for? He came in, he made his name. Here we are, this many years later, because you're still talking about him. Absolutely, he did the right thing, right? And we're talking about a guy who went through an era of boxing in Britain, right, where not a lot of guys were getting a lot of North American play.
Yeah.
Was a thing as well, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Bone Loads says right there, Hamed was good, right? He remembers his first loss, even, and that's what it was. That's all it took. It seemed like, right?
Yeah, it's a short period of time, and the way he came on, and I think people who follow boxing weren't in any way unaware that it was going to be quick. It was going to be quick and done. He wasn't going to hang around for 15 years. But what he did outside of boxing, and one of my other names I've picked because of just what he did outside of boxing, that is the thing that crossed over, and boxing desperately needs that. So, yeah, kudos to Nassim Hamed. Fantastic skills, made better by his charisma.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, talk to me. Talk to me, if you will, Steve Swift.
In the middleweight area, this gentleman, and we're talking, 40 years ago? This gentleman, Harold Bomber Graham, was the greatest uncrowned champion. The reason why I have put him here is because people don't know of him. And he was one, and I have to say, I agree, he was one of the greatest defensive boxers I have ever seen. Now, that means people aren't going to like it, because people don't like that kind of boxing. They don't like that kind of, you can't hit me. You can't hit me. Rumour was, he came out of Nottingham, my hometown. Rumour was that he would have sparring sessions in which he wasn't allowed to hit. He was just told, just don't get hit. And no one could lay a glove on him. Now, the man never won a title. That's weighed heavily on him. It appears that since he's left the ring, and I've read an autobiography, he's had some struggles, and that's a terrible thing. And what boxing tends to do is it tends to forget an awful lot of people who were incredibly important at their time to boxing. It just tends to forget them. And that, I believe, has happened to Harold Bomber Graham. And I think that it's important to bring people's attention. Go on YouTube and have a look at some of his fights. He never won a title, and that is never won a big title, and that's a world title, and that's such a shame. But and that's because, go on, sorry.
I was just going to say one of the best, most crisp, most clean right crosses out of defense. He would draw you in and then throw that right. It was a beauty. It was a thing of beauty. Like, absolutely. I know exactly what you're talking about, but very, very overlooked. And this goes back to what I was saying. And we're going to kind of put a bow on this towards the end of all of this and talk about how overlooked British boxing and British boxers were on the whole. Right?
Yeah, because I have got some names in here that just will not resound or resonate for American and Canadian and Northwestern, North American audiences generally, but were really important to us. This guy, just, oh, this guy too. This is old Henry, isn't it? And Henry's hammer. Now,
Yes, it
it's
is.
Henry Cooper. So we are talking about the late 60s here. So this is what? My maths is terrible. 50 years ago?
Yeah,
No, more than that.
more than that.
70
Well,
years, 60 years ago?
Yeah, 60 years ago.
Okay, so late 60s. He could have been. The main thing with Henry is, and he's not here for the boxing for me, but I will talk about the boxing first. Heavyweight, Henry's hammer, big punch. That's really all he had, in my view. Had a brother who was also a boxer that didn't really do as well as him. And there's a reason for that. I'll tell you why in a minute. He knocked down Muhammad Ali. And people say if it wasn't for the bell, then that man would have been the champion. Now, I firmly agree with that, Tidster. I do agree with that. I think it, but I don't think it was, well, Henry Cooper was just magnificent and, you know, it was just brilliant. I think it was just, well, that was a punch that got through. I think it's more to do with that.
I think it might have also had to have been, a lot of people don't understand, like, Henry Cooper was a southpaw
Well,
who fought orthodox.
Yeah.
Right. So his big power punch was in front of him. That's why they called it, you know, Henry's hammer.
Henry's hammer.
Because it was that jab, and it came at this weird kind of almost uppercutish kind of angle on it. And you didn't really know what to do. So, and we're talking a very young Cassius Clay here. You know what I mean? And a very, at the time, experienced Cooper. So that plays into it a lot, you know, as well as I do, right? The old dog's always got some tricks.
Yeah. And, you know, we've got an awful lot in the 70s, certainly in the early 70s, of heavyweights like Joe Bugner, you know, who are not really, you wouldn't put them in the top 100 even, maybe top 50, maybe, no, I don't think even the top 100. But Henry Cooper's different because of what he did outside of boxing. So Henry Cooper had a charisma. Now, he wasn't a song and dance man. He's not like a Rocky Marciano. So he's not kind of, you know, he's not singing and dancing. But what he does do is go on TV shows. So he's interviewed on, you know, on big interview shows, and he'll go on game shows. He was on a series of commercials with 70s England and Liverpool footballer Kevin Keegan. They had which is still made now, I think. They had an aftershave called Brute, B-R-U-T, Brute. And by Fabergé. And by Fabergé. As if it's something great. I mean, in the 70s, even when I was a kid, it was lower down.
100%. Yes.
So, you know, and the phrase was splash it all over. So he appeared on prime time commercials with a footballer and brought boxing to people's consciousness, when in the 70s it wasn't that kind of thing. So, you know, it's what he did outside of boxing and his personality and all of that. He had a great punch, but it's what he did outside of it, which is why he's on that list. Great stuff.
Now, I'm going to give you this one because we started off this list with Lennox Lewis, who is, you know, I mean, he's a Canadian Brit, and you send over your list and it's got Steve Collins on there. And I'm like, well, wait a second. This guy's an Irishman.
He's British. He's British. You said you wanted Brits. He is British. Come on now.
All right. Tell that to his IRA brethren.
I'm not sure I will. I'll be speaking to them later, obviously, but I won't mention you because I know they want to talk to you.
Oh, they ain't finding me again.
So, I don't want to go down that road at all. This gentleman is not. I don't think he'll be that well known. Don't think he'll be that well known to your side of the pond at all. Mainly because his main opponents were English.
Right.
So, you know, beat Eubank twice, beat Nigel Benn twice, was middleweight champion, fantastic power, fantastic durability. But one reason why, I'm going to tell you a little story of one reason why I I mean, I love watching him anyway because he was smooth but tough and really and rolled in and rolled out. And it's beautiful stuff. One of the stories I've got, which is around the boxing of the business of boxing, is that I think it's the first match against Eubank, and Collins is a contender in this, and he put out a story that he had some kind of hypnotist, and he had a hypnotist who had told him and who had put it in his mind that he was impenetrable and could not lose. And Eubank bought into this and started to talk about it in the papers and on TV and say how ridiculous it is. But he kept mentioning it. And I think that the Collins camp thought, hello. And so, was this the second? This might have been the second fight because Collins is in last. So Eubank's already in the ring.
Mm-hmm.
And Collins comes in and he's got his robe on and he's got a hood up. And he comes in and he's shadow boxing. And he takes the robe, undoes the robe and takes the hood off. And he's got a pair of headphones on. Quick cut to Eubank, who is like this. And Collins said, Eubank thought I was still listening to the hypnotist tape. I was just listening to a bit of music.
Sure.
But it got right in the head of Eubank. That is a beautiful thing. Apart from the fantastic boxing, that is a beautiful thing. And that he could do that and then he could have some fun with that. And that a lot of the time, I mean, you'll have Eubank on your list, of course. And a lot of the time in the Eubank period, it was, how can you beat the man? How can you beat the man? What are you going to do to beat the man? That's how you beat the man, because Eubank's quite florid and he's also easy to school in that respect because of his kind of psyche. That worked so beautifully.
And if he fought Collins after the Michael Watson stuff, if I'm not mistaken, right? And we're going to get into that because that has a whole different realm of boxing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I know I love it. I love it. Let's talk about it right here. Ricky Hatton. Don't scoff at your fellow man. This is a 2005 Ring Magazine Fighter of the Year. This is probably the only guy, in my opinion, during that era of boxing who had success, had fame inside of North America. Because when we were talking about British boxers, this was the guy that fought Floyd. Yeah, sure, he lost. This is the guy that fought Manny. Yeah, sure, he lost to that one too. And his very last fight. But outside of that, he's smashing dudes. Yeah, they called him a British Mexican for a reason, because he had the head movement of a truck. There was nothing there, but he had a granite chin, you know what I mean, at the time, and he was fun to watch, right?
Yeah, he's a local boy. He's a local Manchester boy. I live in Manchester. He's a local man. And he's blue collar, isn't he? He's blue collar. He's your Kelly type. And so he's good for North America. That's right. He's honest and wears his heart on his sleeve. And you're right. There is no silky skill there. I have to ask you, who else did he smash apart from Costa Stew? But you see, the thing is, it's coloured a bit for me by the post-boxing stuff that we've still got lots of stories in this country about, and not to denigrate this in any way, shape, or form. His struggles since and all of that, and his relationships and who he's just been out with and all that kind of stuff. We still get a bit of that going on. And promoting and co-promoting and all that kind of thing. But at the time, I remember the Somebody's O Has Got to Go stuff with Mayweather, and he was up there. So yes, I can understand them both. I mean, you get two things, don't you, with Ricky? You get both meat and you get potatoes as well. So why would you not? That can be a tasty repast, can't it?
100%. Now let's talk about the man amongst machines. When we're talking about some of the greats in British boxing, I mean, this is a guy who laughed at other people's abilities, other people's great. Like when you think about guys that not only can go out there and win a belt, that's one thing, but defend a belt. Defend it one time. Defend it 3 times. Hell, defend it 14 times. Cool, no problem. Defend it 26 times. And you're close to what greatness was that came out of Joe Calzaghe. Joe Calzaghe was a dude, like we're talking 46-0. Everybody talks about Floyd. Everybody talks about all of this, right? And the greatness. And don't get it twisted. Yes, absolutely, 100%. But a lot of people overlook this guy, and this is one of the reasons. And I'll say this again. It's because it's British.
It's not just that, Tidster. He's Welsh. So, British, but, you could say, okay, is he British? Some people don't understand that. Plus, he didn't buy into the big Hollywood trainer thing of, I know, I'll go with this camp. I know, I'll go with, his dad trained him the whole time through his career. Enzo trained him the whole time. It was hermetically sealed. Let's remember, I think it's his last 2 fights, correct me if I'm wrong, Bernard Hopkins and Roy Jones Jr.
Yeah.
Unanimous decisions on both occasions. Come on, that's some serious talent. And one of the reasons why he's overlooked is because, like Lennox Lewis, this man knew how to defend and he knew how to win a fight tactically. Not to say he didn't have great power, but he knew how to do it. And if you really love boxing, and I'm probably, I'm stating this in a way that, not to say that other people don't, but an awful lot of us like big knockouts and all of that. Yeah. And you may not get that with Joe Calzaghe, but what you will get is superb defense and superb tactics. And as you say, knowing how to win. And he's been expunged from people's memories. And that is an absolute travesty.
He's the one guy. Do you remember when they did the Super 8? Remember that whole thing? And it was and it was great. For me, it brought a new love back for boxing. You know what I mean? Because and you had guys like Kessler in this whole thing. You had guys in there that were very, very known, but he wasn't. He wasn't in that tournament, and I was always bummed out about that he wasn't included in that, because we're talking one of the best middleweights of all time.
Oh,
right
yeah.
Here. There's no doubt about it. Like you cannot argue that the things that Calzaghe did in his fights. I mean, listen, I love me some Bernard Hopkins, and that fight will go down as one of the top. I mean, it's got to be top 5 fights of all time. And Bernard Hopkins is another guy who didn't he come back at like 120 years old and win a title?
He did. Well, and the thing is that both top tacticians. So when you say I like me some Bernard Hopkins, you've got to like you some boxing.
100%.
You've not got to like you some business of boxing with a bit of hoopla of boxing, because you've got to like the boxing. And that's the same with this dude. You've got to like the boxing. I watched the match with Ball and Doheny earlier today, and that was a tactical match, and it was a tactical fight. And at no point did you think this is going to be incendiary. It was nasty, but it wasn't incendiary. But you like boxing, don't you? So you watch it. That's why I love this man. And as you say, what a record. You talk about Floyd. This is the guy, because he did it without the hoopla. So he did it without the psychology. Okay, yeah, he was quite arrogant about other people's talent, but that's because he had the talent that they lacked.
Sure. But I mean, 100%, when you think about 46 fights, 21 title defenses, that's unheard of. That is unheard of in a sport where you and I both know padding isn't just a thing that the young girls do with their bras back then. This was a real thing that happens in the world of boxing, and I think that this has a lot to do with the fact that you had so many governing bodies. You had so many different things out there. And it's like, well, my guy's the best. Well, my guy's the best. My guy's 33-0. My guy's 34-0. I got a guy who's 37-0. Yeah, well, I got a guy. And everybody's trying to get that. But in order to get that, sometimes you got to throw them in there with, you see something, but you're like, I can make a star out of this guy, but I can't make a star out of him for at least another 20 fights. So what do? You
Yeah.
don't burn it up. You throw him in there with cans, right? And this is what happens. It happens all the time. Now,
This guy's just the one. Probably the one with Lennox Lewis for me.
yes. What in a world where you have people that have ridiculous nicknames, and everybody seems to be thinking that they're the chosen one. This is the guy who should have been the chosen one, 100%, Joe Calzaghe. Now, I have to put him on here. And the reason that I have to put him on here is because I have questions for you as a Brit, Steve Swift. How is it that this guy managed to skate through life? You talk about the things after boxing. So let's talk about that, because let's talk about boxing first. We're talking about Chris Eubank Sr. Chris Eubank Jr., also a phenomenal boxer who, by the way, happens to have a fight coming up against one of Chris Eubank Sr.'s opponent's sons. I mean, yeah, Conor Benn, son of Nigel Benn, is fighting Chris Eubank Jr., son of Chris Eubank Sr., way after the fact, because Chris Eubank Jr., 35 years old now or something like that. He's about 3 years past when he should have stopped. And Conor Benn is like, 20, 28, 29. Come on. What are we doing here? What are we doing here?
The reason why we're having that fight, as I've said constantly, is because Ben and Eubank Sr. couldn't have a third fight. So what the promoters are saying is have their sons fight. It doesn't matter about the sons. It's all about the fathers. And as the sons, and Conor Benn's different, isn't it? Because he's coming up. Whereas Chris Eubank, I might have said if I was Chris Eubank, I'm my own man now, I think. And to be fair to his father, he sort of said throughout the fight, I don't like this. And he's even saying now, I don't think it'll happen. Hoping, I think, that his son will say it's not happening. He's even said, I can name opponents who could step in if my son didn't want to do this, and I don't think he will.
Which is weird because, listen, all of the things, one thing you can never say about Chris Eubank Sr. was that he wasn't different. He wasn't unique. He was always very unique, very different, very flamboyant, very in a world where he knew he had to do something to stand out. We're talking a guy who comes from immigrant descent, right? His mother's Jamaican and his father's British or something like that, but he's a British born boy, right? But a little over the top. He knew he had to do something to stand out because skill alone wasn't doing it for British boxers. British boxers at a time have all been very, very good, but they couldn't stand out because they couldn't get noticed. He started being a weirdo.
Now, the word weirdo is interesting. I was just going to say he didn't do it like anybody else. So bear in mind he had the speech impediment. So he had the soft F. So what you don't get is him shouting and screaming like an awful lot of boxers do. So everything is quiet, and I want you to listen to me. So I'm going to bring you in because I don't have to shout. What I'm going to tell you now is something very important. And he couldn't do that if he wasn't really intelligent and actually saying things that will really make you think.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something we hadn't seen. Now, there were lots of boxers who didn't shout and scream because they didn't have the charisma. So they would just say, how do you think the fight's going to go? I think it's going to go okay. I think I'm going to beat him.
Right.
That's different. But boxers who had the charisma generally would either shout or be arrogant. He wouldn't. He's very quiet.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to listen to what he's saying. Very slow, very quiet. He talks to you, not at you. That's something entirely different. But in this country, we didn't like him until he went to war.
Yeah, and that was the thing. He would go to war. Like he would bite down on the gum shield and just throw hands. And we saw how that worked out for him a lot of times, which really leads me to believe that Chris Eubank Sr. may we may be living in a world where people haven't figured it out yet, but that is a brain that I would love to see donated for research afterwards. Because if there is not a case for a boxer who has maybe become this persona that he is, right? This human that he has become because of boxing, because of the persona that he portrayed, then he basically turned into living the gimmick, which really, in my opinion, was the biggest problem with his son. His son living in this shadow for how long now? Up until recently.
Yeah.
Right? And he's like,
Yeah.
listen, dude, I gotta finally be my own man. And Chris Sr. was like, fuck you then.
Yes. And for those who don't know, there were an awful lot of things that Chris Eubank Sr. did after he left the ring, which were maybe not even calculated, but certainly looked like they were attention grabbing situations. So he sported a country gentleman squire, jodhpurs, check jacket, monocle, for Christ's sake. He drove around in the cab of an articulated lorry. So he had an enormous, and he would get in trouble with the law for that sometimes, about parking and all of that. However, you've got to remember, Tid Stir, that at this time, you've got the beginning of reality TV. And in this country, as I'm sure in yours too, you can become a star and earn plenty of money moving from reality TV to reality TV program. You can be famous for being famous. And that is something that maybe he thought he could do. Certainly, I've seen him. Talking of Top of the Pops again. I've seen him presenting Top of the Pops, and he was erudite and intelligent and funny. And I wanted to see him do it every single week. This is a man who had something outside of boxing, and in a way, it's a shame that he was grabbed by boxing, because actually he could have done more.
He absolutely could have been. His first bunch of fights were actually in the United States. You know what I mean? Before he even started boxing, so he had kind of had a leg up there. But the reason that he never got thrown back into the United States after he made a name is kind of interesting to me, and I would like to know what the story behind that is with Chris Eubank, because he very well should have been a guy fighting those middleweights in the United States at the time too.
Yeah, and the thing is that it kind of gets caught into he gets caught up with the kind of it's like on a much smaller scale, the kind of Hagler and Hearns and and all of that, Leonard, that kind of thing. So the Ben and Eubank and also Michael Watson situation there, and Steve Collins in that mix
now
is something that we as Brits grabbed hold of and said, actually, we like this. And it was on and on TV. People flocked to it. And so it was incredibly popular. Saturday night prime time matches. And that hasn't often happened with boxing on terrestrial TV. And if I remember rightly, it was on terrestrial TV. It was on ITV, I think, our commercial TV channel. And that may be one of the reasons why. And the reason why we loved him is because he went into war. He went to war with Ben and with Watson too. And also when he lost and came back to say, that's taught me something, then that is something that we loved him for.
And let's talk about Michael Watson very quickly before we wrap this whole thing up, because that's the dangers. That's the absolute dangers of boxing at its finest right there. Because we're talking about a fight where Chris was down. He was down in that fight. Watson was handing it to him. And then, from out of nowhere, Chris Eubank lands this uppercut that kind of wobbles him. And then they get into a thing and he goes down. Referee gives him a count. He kind of gets to the corner, sits down in between rounds. Now we come out for that 12th round and he still doesn't really know what's going on. And Chris just teed off a couple of times and referee stops it. And you think to yourself, that's the end of the fight. But it wasn't, because that was the beginning of the fight. That was the beginning of the fight for Michael Watson and the beginning of the fight for his life, because he collapses in the corner. And they don't have the proper, here's where things went south. They didn't have the proper equipment. They didn't have the proper procedures. They didn't have anything in place that they were supposed to have to save this man from any further damage. And the guy went into an instant coma. Now, as the person, I get it. This is your job. This is 100% your job. And when you're in the ring and you're fighting and that adrenaline is still there and you're still pumping, and that's great, cool. You can look past it, but there's that next day. There's that day after that. There's that 3-4 days after that. And I guarantee you, this is one of the things that got into Chris's head, because if you look at his fights after the Michael Watson fight, he wasn't headhunting anymore. He was a body shot kind of guy. He was a different fighter altogether, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah. And first of all, Chris Eubank has been very honest about all of this and has never shied away from talking about it, and has been very. The thing about Chris Eubank is that there's not. It's interesting because he might be playing a persona, but in that persona, there's very little filter. Right. So he will talk about how that made him feel. And what he hasn't done is he hasn't turned his back on Michael Watson and said that I can't. That he has. And Michael Watson, extraordinary fighter, and he fights every day. And he's come back from a place that he's achieved things that nobody ever thought he would. And in his instance, and I said earlier, boxing often turns its back on fighters who need help. And in his instance, that's not been the case. Boxing has. My understanding is that boxing has provided somewhat for the man. But Eubank has actually been very honest about that and has engaged with the gentleman, with Michael Watson. And Michael Watson's the fight carries on for him, but what an extraordinary person. How extraordinary. And to bear no grudges and to have no bitterness. It's extraordinary. And it's a really wonderful boxing story. That sounds like it's denigrated, but it's not. It's a fantastic boxing story to have that man fighting the fight of his life and winning.
Absolutely. And like I said, this is the dangers of getting into a sport that you don't play. You play football. We've all heard it before. You play, soccer, you play baseball, you play water polo. You don't play boxing. And this is the realities of it, and even more so when you get into the heavyweights. And I know that there's a lot of guys that we didn't even touch base on, that like the Carl Froch's of the world, who did have worldwide popularity. We didn't even mention your boy, Derek Chisora, at all, right?
We need to do a second one of these because there are a lot more. And Froch was just dropped off the bottom of the list there, because Froch, you get a twofer with Froch, don't you? Because you need to mention George Groves with Froch, because you can't mention one without the other. So you do get two of those. I mean, two great fights with those two. But yes, we need to do another one because there are an awful lot more British fighters like who you might not know, like Alan Minter, from the 70s, and Boom Boom Minter and that kind of thing. Who was denigrated, by the way, because he actually made that noise when he hit the punches. Ooh, ooh, ooh. And so opponent said, he's putting me off by grunting. That's how good he was. So we need to do this again. And I feel sure we will.
We didn't even mention guys like, Jack Berg. Jack Berg's another guy who's 14 title defenses.
Tell me. I don't know. Tell me.
So Jack, light welterweight, right? We're talking back in the 30s.
Yeah.
We're talking back, because then we get into discussions of post-war boxers and prior to that, because that's a different realm altogether. You know what I mean? We're talking, he was a light welterweight champion, Jack Kid Berg, light welterweight champion back in 1930, 14 total fights. Are you ready for this? 192 fights with 157 wins, only 61 wins by knockout, ladies and gentlemen. That's a dude who put in rounds.
He did. That's 3 or 4 lives right there.
Yeah.
And there's a lot, there are an awful lot, because I grew up in the 70s and I watched boxing from a very young age, and it was on TV. And so there were an awful lot of 70s British fighters,
Right.
like Dave Boy Green and that kind of Chris Finnegan, who are Charlie Magri, that I really want to talk about.
And we will. And we will. Absolutely. Because I love having these conversations with you, Steve. And I get to learn things because there are things about some of these boxers that I didn't know as well. You know what I mean? And everybody talks about, like, you talk about the Sugar Ray Leonards, you talk about the Bernard Hopkins, you talk about the Haglers, the Hearns, the Larry Holmes, the Muhammad Ali's. There's a lot of big names out there in American boxing, but a lot of people don't understand the roots. And I really like pointing out to people, this is where it came from. This is where every other person was nicknamed gentleman. You know what I mean? It was Gentleman Joe this, right? Even though their name might have been Timothy, but you know what they called him? Jack. Gentleman Jack. There are 9,000 Gentleman Jacks from the Union Jack. I mean, come on. What are we doing here, Steve?
It's the business of boxing, Tidster.
That's
And
what
it will never go away. Thank goodness.
That's what it is. Steve, as always, please, everybody, go check him out. Subscribe to his stuff over at World Weary Guy 1. You can also see all of our stuff that we do here at Tid Talk, and also on What's a Work on YouTube. Boy, oh boy, it's been a fun one, Steve. It's been a fun one. And until next time, remember, ladies and gentlemen, you always just got to remember, man, the going gets tough. Tuck that chin.